You know, what I'm thinking about is, I mean, all of them seem to be centered around this war that they want to spark up against immigrants.
Right.
And it seems to be very sophisticated. You don't always hear the outright racism towards African Americans like once upon a time you would, but it seems to manifest itself in all these police shootings. You do hear a lot of the overt racism towards Latino immigrants. You hear that more and more.
And the Sotomayor thing is just, bringing all that out.
Right, and and we're hearing in places like Arizona that people are going to the, almost like to the borders as training ground.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. Yeah, in fact, the whole Minuteman movement, which Dave and I covered, minute by minute almost, was the Minuteman movement needs to be seen in its larger context. And this is when all these armchair warriors went down and sat in the back of pickup trucks and watched the border. And this happened for a couple summers in a row a few years back. And what they were doing, they were the vanguard of a deliberate Republican PR campaign to try to issueize the whole immigrant thing. And they got this in the news and they put the issue on the map. And they did this in order to get that issue going for the 2006-2008 elections.
Right.
Because the Republicans were staking those elections on fomenting immigrant hatred against immigrants. I think it largely backfired and failed, but boy, was that an interesting show while it lasted.
Yeah, well, but it failed maybe in terms of policy, and it failed maybe in getting particular. But there's a lot of violence.
These guys organized,
and it's a lot of violence that goes on in these places, which is crazy.
Beating the hell out of guys coming over the border. There were beatings. I think there may have been a murder or two.
What about the right wing? Bully pulpits, right-wing radio, the Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity's, the Michael Savages, and what have you. How is this all playing out within what they do?
I will not be shy about saying that Bill O'Reilly has George Tiller's blood on his hands.
Right, I think a lot of people feel that way.
I think we need to say that absolutely out loud. The talkers have been saying forever that we're just entertainers, and what we say doesn't really matter. If what we say doesn't really matter, why is advertising a $500 billion industry? If what goes on in the media doesn't matter, this doesn't even make sense. Do they say that to their advertisers?
Well, let's take it even closer to home. When NWA put out the F the Police record, the FBI issued that memo about Easy and how it was going to be harmful for law enforcement. When that record came out, police departments around the country where they had jurisdiction in the venues that the group was performing made it so that they couldn't perform that song. And I think the one place was in Detroit where they did perform the song. Undercover 20 of them jumped up on stage and went after them. We're looking at, rap artists, whether it's been Tupac when he was alive on down to Mac Dre before he passed, where they've all spoken out and said some incendiary things about the police and have come under great scrutiny, lawsuits filed, lyrics listened to and picked up. So I'm just using that as an example to say if they're listening on that level and holding these artists somehow accountable, why aren't we doing the right-wing talk show pundits?
Thank you for that point. I may use that. That is an excellent point. Yes, speech does matter. It's a well-established principle that what we say, we have to be responsible for our words. We have to be responsible for the things that we say. And those of us who have the microphone, like you and I do right now, have to be especially responsible. Bill O'Reilly is responsible. And, Bernie Goldberg, who put out a list of 100 people in America who are destroying America. And then James Atkinson walks into a Unitarian church in Knoxville last summer and shoots 3 people with the intention of shooting a hell of a lot more, on the basis of this list. This is incitement. And if we're going to call it, you're right, if we're going to call it incitement when rappers do it, we have to call it incitement when Bill O'Reilly does.
So what are the legal recourses and how feasible is it to see it carried out a certain way?
I don't know. I think that's a question all of America is starting to talk about. Because, like I said, this has all been dismissed in the name of kind of free speech, but I think we're coming around to realize that we are responsible for speech. And I think there are probably legal frameworks in place that haven't been looked at for a very long time that we're going to start looking at and talking about, because we can't have this kind of thing going on.
With you writing about this sort of stuff and documenting it, do you put yourself in danger?
I have not so far, but the thing I have to mention, though, is that I live in Canada. I'm a native Californian and an American citizen, but I live in Vancouver, BC.
Okay, well, I mean, they're up there too.
They are up there, but not nearly.
The Great White North, as some people like to call it. Yes. Seattle, Portland.
Right.
I don't know. Sometimes Canada. I mean, I've been to Vancouver where I've seen some interesting things.
Oh yeah. But there's the organized racism. We have Glenn back on the air. I don't know what they were thinking when they brought Glenn back to Canada, but there he is. In fact, there's one station that runs him 24 hours a day, and that's a shame. And we do have a nascent right wing that's mostly out in the prairies, but Canada, by and large, it's a democratic socialist country, and the fundamental attitudes of people are very progressive, and it prides itself intensely. It's much more embedded in its identity than this diversity thing. They say we're not a melting pot, we're a salad.
With Obama being elected, they said this sparked. This was inspiration for a lot of these right-wing.
Absolutely, because they feel very disenfranchised. They're out of power. They don't have the voice that they had when George Bush was in there, and they felt like one of their own was in office. They quieted way down. Once Bush was in, we haven't seen an abortion doctor being killed in a decade.
Right, since the Clinton administration.
Right, now we're 5 months in the Obama administration, and here we go again. And I think, I've been writing about this. I think we're going to see a lot of it. We are getting signs, lots and lots and lots of signs.
Well, why don't we?
They're organizing. The SPLC says the group memberships are up by 2/3. This business of all the arming up the gun shows Obama's going to take our guns. The right wing is arming up. They are putting themselves into opposition of the government. One of the things that happens with right-wing extremist violent groups, when they go violent, they always have this belief that whoever their enemy is, they're in cahoots with the government. And so they're moving to this opposition to the government, and that's always sets up the confrontation that leads to things like Waco will be rich.
What has been the reaction from Homeland Security? Now, under Bush, we had the Patriot Act being acted out or being acted upon.
Which is why
So people's phones were tapped. A lot of organizations, both locally and through the federal government, found themselves under scrutiny.
Yes.
The MoveOn.orgs of the world might have found their meetings taped, infiltrated, what have you. And within the African American community, the whole COINTELPRO situation is something that is a nasty stain that we think still continues today, from the Black Panthers who are out of Oakland and how that destroyed them all the way up.
Anybody who thinks that their email isn't being read by the NSA, or isn't being at least captured by the NSA, it could be potentially read by the government, is living in a dream world, right? That's
right. Yeah. But my point that I was getting at is that some of this against groups that I mentioned was so overt, and we're finding, that even now, even under Obama, that there's been police infiltration, informants. One of the biggest things impacting, people of color communities has been this whole thing of government informants showing up. And so, they point to one person, next thing you know, entire, large swaths of people are arrested, on false charges. If we have that going on in our communities, and you have all this violence and all this other stuff being ratcheted up, is that taking place on the other side? Are they infiltrating these groups? Are these angry white men being profiled, the way that they are profiling, black males?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security, as I said, put out this memo on April 7th, pointing out that these right-wing groups were arming up, growing, and spreading, and it should be a concern to law enforcement. And it was kind of, even though this memo was prepared largely during the Bush administration, it came out, had been several months in the making. And it was a fairly mild advisory. It was very factual. It said, here are the facts, here's what's happening. Law enforcement should be aware. That's pretty much all it said. The right wing got a hold of this and totally freaked out. The Obama administration's calling this all terrorists and criminals. And it wasn't quite like that if you actually read the memo. But the fact is, on the left we looked at that and we said, about time. Because during the Bush administration, there was, as you say, they watched the left like hawks and they didn't watch their own right flank. And I guess maybe they didn't need to because those folks were fairly quiet. But they are always out there. And the hate radio talkers, as we've said, have always been fomenting them. And now here we are in the Obama administration and they're finally organizing themselves for action. And DHS is on to this and they are watching.